Most folk think propaganda is just ads, a billboard, a campaign slogan, something simple. But what if propaganda became a science? What if there was a place that figured out how to rewire entire societies without a single bullet fired? Welcome to the Tavistock story, the factory of consent, the birthplace of modern mind control. The 20th century didn't just build weapons of war, it built weapons of belief. Long before television, before TikTok, the British establishment was already experimenting with how to steer human thought. Their lab was called Wellington House, and their job was simple: make the public love war. In 1913, a group of journalists, psychologists, and aristocrats gathered in London with one goal: manipulate public emotion. They discovered that facts don't win wars, feelings do. You feed the population fear, pride, guilt, hope, and they'll march themselves to the slaughterhouse. What started as wartime propaganda quietly evolved into a lifelong obsession: how to control entire populations through emotion and suggestion. One of the architects of this new craft was Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew. He turned his uncle's theories about human desire into marketing warfare. Bernays proved that if you could tap into the unconscious, you could sell anything: cigarettes, wars, even ideologies. That blueprint would later fuel the rise of what became the Tavistock Institute. After the First World War, Britain was haunted by broken men. Shell shock, they called it. But behind closed doors, psychologists realized something darker. Trauma didn't just destroy, it rewired. Fear, isolation, and repetition could break a person down, then rebuild them to accept new orders. The Tavistock Clinic was set up to treat these soldiers, but it also became a testing ground for how trauma reshapes behavior. By the 1930s, Tavistock had become the empire's psychological nerve center, training officers, social workers, and media experts to understand one thing: the human mind is programmable. The same tools that fix trauma could also create it, and through it, reshape societies. When the Second World War ended, the men behind Tavistock didn't close up shop. They just switched uniforms. The war had proven that mass populations could be guided, terrified, unified, or pacified through messaging alone. Why waste that power? In 1947, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was born, a so-called research center studying group behavior. Sounds harmless, but behind that, it became, as Estelin argues, and as I see it, the social engineer of the post-war world, the quiet architect of how we think, consume, and obey. This is where the story starts, not in some smoky back room, but in open daylight. A psychological think tank, bankrolled by powerful patrons, building the tools to manage societies at scale. The Institute's language is soft: human relations, consultancy, action research. But the effect, according to my research, is hard. A method for shaping mass perception without a shot fired. After the war, Tavistock had tasted power. They'd seen what fear could do when it was bottled and sold, and they weren't about to give it up. 1947. Britain's cities still in rubble, the empire cracked but clinging on. The men behind Tavistock turned their wartime psychops inward. The new enemy wasn't Germany anymore, it was the human mind itself. Officially, they called it the Institute of Human Relations, a polite name for research into group behavior. Strip away the jargon, and you find experiments asking one question: how far can ordinary people be pushed before they break, bend, or obey? Tavistock ran studies on soldiers, civil servants, factory workers, testing conformity, obedience, emotional contagion, how rumors spread, how guilt makes a man vote against his own interests, how fear can keep a nation quiet. Soon their methods caught American attention. The CIA wanted the same results, but faster, louder, deeper. They built on the British blueprint and called their version MK Ultra: drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation. The goal was the same: steer behavior, control perception, rewrite memory. Tavistock thinkers trained the trainers, men who'd go back to Langley, Rand Corp, Stanford Research Institute, bringing the gospel of psychological warfare. The think tank Hydra was born, each head speaking the same language of influence. By the 60s, the lab coat was traded for the record sleeve. Culture became the new battlefield. Music, fashion, and rebellion, all repackaged as freedom. And at the center of that storm, 4 lads from Liverpool, the Beatles. According to Daniel Estelin's book, and my own reading of it, the Beatles weren't just a lucky accident. They were a social experiment dressed as rock and roll. The machinery of Tavistock, media networks, and industry backers created a sound and a look engineered to rewrite youth identity. The goal wasn't to sell records, it was to re-engineer values, to teach a generation to question authority, chase pleasure, and abandon the moral codes that had kept communities anchored. A population that believed it was rebelling was far easier to steer. The same foundations that financed LSD research also financed counterculture art and festivals. The same psychologists who studied trauma designed album imagery meant to bypass logic and hit the unconscious. Whether you take it literally or not, the pattern's clear. Create idols, flood the senses, drown logic, and the collective mind starts to dance to a tune it didn't write. Once the youth were cracked open, television and advertising finished the job. Every living room got a screen. Every screen a voice, whispering what to want, what to fear, what to buy. The laboratory had gone national. Behind the music, behind the headlines, Tavistock graduates spread into every layer of Western life: media psychology, education reform, political consultancy, advertising. The language changed, but the goal stayed the same. Social engineering as science. Replace faith with consumption. Replace community with brand loyalty. Replace thought with feeling. They called it progress, but what it really was programming. By the end of the 20th century, the laboratory had gone digital. What started as group therapy research in a London clinic became the invisible architecture of the internet age. Algorithms, nudges, dopamine hits, the same old Tavistock principles wrapped in shiny new code. The tools of control are no longer leaflets or radio waves, they're smartphones, feeds, filters, metrics. Every scroll, every like, every outrage measured and fed back to keep you hooked, angry, obedient. In my research, based on Estelin's book, Tavistock isn't a dusty think tank anymore. It's the ghost in the machine. Its graduates and theories seeded the behavioral science units inside governments, the social media giants, the consultancy firms writing the playbooks for behavioral change. They don't need to censor, they just drown you. They don't need to break you, they just entertain you into submission. What the Beatles did to a generation with music, the feed does to everyone now, 24 hours a day. Identity politics, endless crisis cycles, fear and distraction, all of it a feedback loop, and the public thinks it's organic. But the design principle is the same as it was at Wellington House. Manipulate emotion, bypass logic, steer the herd. You can see the fingerprints. Behavioral psychology used to sell wars, to manage pandemics, to push policies no one voted for. That's the power of the Tavistock method. It isn't about convincing you, it's about making you feel like you decided yourself. We've walked through the origins of propaganda, the clinic that became a control room, the culture they shaped, and the algorithms that replaced the airwaves. This is my reading of Tavistock, based on Daniel Estelin's work. Maybe you believe it, maybe you don't, but at least you've heard it. Because the moment you stop asking who's pulling the strings, you become the puppet. Stay awake, stay free.